That night, the rain poured relentlessly, and the scent of damp earth seeped into the house with a chilly breeze. The dim glow of the oil lamp cast faint shadows on the worn-out walls. Sadek sat at his old wooden desk, pen in hand, but his restless mind refused to let him write. A faint chime echoed through the alleyway, pulling him out of his thoughts. Who could possibly visit him at such a late hour? Sadek Hedayat slowly rose from his chair and opened the door. A tall stranger with deep, piercing eyes stood on the doorstep. His black cloak, drenched by the heavy rain, clung to his frame. The man said, "I have a story, but it must be told by someone who can write it. Only you can do it." Overcome with curiosity, Sadek allowed the man inside. Without sitting down, the stranger began to speak. His story was about a man from the future, desperate to alter his tragic fate. He described cities that had yet to be built, flying machines, and a world where people no longer read books. Sadek listened intently, but something about the man unsettled him. It was as if this stranger was more than just a storyteller. As time passed, the man's face seemed oddly familiar, but Sadek couldn't recall where he might have seen him before. When the tale ended, the man turned to Sadek and said, "Now that you've heard my story, you cannot forget it. But if you don't write it, your destiny will change as well." Then, without a sound, he vanished, as if he had never existed. That very night, Sadek began to write it. The story not only transformed his life, but also the lives of thousands who read it. Yet no one ever discovered who that man was, or why his story left such a profound mark on Hedayat. Sadek stayed up all night, feverishly writing the stranger's story. The words poured onto the pages as if they had a life of their own, as though he had lived the events himself. By dawn, the story was complete, a haunting narrative filled with despair, hope, and the inescapable pull of destiny. Exhausted but satisfied, Sadek fell asleep at his desk, his head resting on the table. When he awoke, sunlight streamed through the small window of his room. But something was amiss. The story he had written the night before was gone. Every page had disappeared as if they had never existed. Panic-stricken, Sadek searched every corner of the house, but there was no trace of his work. At that moment, the doorbell rang again. With a trembling heart, he went to the door and opened it. This time, no one was there. Instead, a leather-bound book with strange engravings in an unknown script lay on the steps. Sadek picked up the book and opened it. To his astonishment, the story he had written was inside, word for word, but with additional details he had never written. It was as though the story had finished itself, complete with an ending he had never imagined. The book's final lines read, "The writer penned his tale, but he could never escape his fate." The story was his destiny, just as all our fates are written by those who exist beyond our understanding. Sadek closed the book, his heart pounding. He was left with an unsettling question. Was the stranger a man, or something beyond human comprehension? And what was to become of his own destiny? Sadek sat in silence, clutching the book, his mind racing. Who had finished the story? Who or what had left the book on his doorstep? A creeping sense of being watched overtook him, but he dismissed it as paranoia. Determined to understand the mystery, he decided to test the book. He showed it to a few close friends. Each one had a strange reaction. Some claimed it was the most captivating story they had ever read, but oddly, they couldn't recall the details afterward. Others, midway through reading, abruptly closed the book in fear, saying it felt as if the story was about them. One of his friends, deeply fascinated by ancient symbols, noticed the engravings on the cover. "These markings resemble ancient scripts," he said. "This story you've written, it might have deeper roots than just your imagination." Sadek decided to investigate further. He took the book to an expert in ancient inscriptions. The man stared at the engravings for a long time, his expression growing darker. These symbols belong to a civilization that vanished thousands of years ago. "Where did you get this book?" Sadek hesitated, reluctant to explain. The expert continued, "These markings have only been found in one place, a place no living person has ever returned from." Sadek's curiosity now burned brighter than ever. He couldn't let the mystery go. Determined to uncover the truth, he decided to seek out the location mentioned by the expert, unaware that this journey would take him to the edges of reality and confront him with the inescapable depths of his destiny.